going on, everybody, and welcome back to InvestQ. And I got a pretty interesting video today. It's regarding a ticker we've talked about numerous times on this channel, none other than SEALSQ, ticker symbol LAES. But we're going to actually start with an article that's not directly from SEALSQ, but it's actually coming from Bloomberg on August 25th. So it came out from yesterday, and the columnist name is Thomas Black. And the headline of the article is "The Quantum Computer Revolution is tantalizingly close." And I found this article interesting because it discusses several developments happening across quantum computing that I think could potentially have implications for the broader post-quantum cybersecurity industry that SEALSQ is trying to participate in. But before we go any further, I want to make a few things extremely clear. I am not saying that this article guarantees anything for SEALSQ. I'm not saying practical quantum computers are guaranteed to arrive on a specific date. And I'm not saying that SEALSQ is guaranteed to benefit if they do. And I'm definitely not saying anything we're discussing today guarantees a particular outcome for LAES stock. And throughout this video, I'm going to show you the sources that I'm using on screen when I'm discussing Thomas Black's article, and I'll show you the Bloomberg article that I'm showing you the article that is on Bloomberg right now. And when I reference something a company has announced or projected, I'll identify that source, and when I connect this information back to SEALSQ, I'll make it clear when we're talking about information from the company versus my own interpretation of what it could potentially mean. And quick disclosure, the paid promotion label that you saw within the first 10 seconds of the video refers only to affiliate promotions on this channel. None of the companies I cover pay me for my stock analysis, and everything discussed is based on publicly available information, my own research and opinions, and none of this is financial advice. And any forward-looking statements, company targets, technological roadmaps, or expected timelines discussed in this video should not be interpreted as guaranteed outcomes. Now, getting back to the topic of the video, and again, shout out to Prophecy. Check out the second link for the $7 7-day trial. LAES is currently trading at $2.49. We're down almost 2% on the day. And going back to the topic of the video is regarding Thomas Black and who he is exactly. And also real quick, again, this article is going over the broader quantum, the overall market of quantum. It's not necessarily something that would only benefit SEALSQ, but this video I'm going to tie into SEALSQ at the end. But anyways, without going on too much of a tangent again, Thomas Black, the Bloomberg opinion columnist, and he's writing about the industrial and transportation sectors per this, what you see on my screen right here. And Bloomberg also says that he was previously a Bloomberg News reporter covering logistics, manufacturing, and private aviation. And there's a distinction here that I think is very important. Again, this is a Bloomberg opinion article. It's not the same thing as a straight Bloomberg News report. So Thomas Black himself is making an argument and providing his analysis about where quantum computing could be heading. And I'm not presenting his conclusions as guaranteed facts simply because Bloomberg published them. But what interests me are the technological developments, company roadmaps, and industry trends he uses to support that argument. And in the article, Black starts off with the electronic numerical integrator and computer, otherwise known as with the acronym ENIAC. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, so apologies if I made that mistake. But it's one of the earliest general purpose digital computers. And according to the historical information, again, it was first built by the University of Pennsylvania for the U.S. Army in 1946, and it weighed about 30 tons and had 18,000 vacuum tubes that filled an expansive room. So Black contrasts that with modern laptops capable of performing billions of calculations per second. And his broader argument is that important technologies can initially be expensive, cumbersome, and extremely limited before improving dramatically over time. So Yeah, and he says it right here. The point is that technology usually starts out clunky, slow, and expensive. So I want to emphasize something here. And that does not prove that quantum. What I want to point out is the fact that this article right here and what I've pointed out so far does not prove that quantum computing will follow the exact same development curve, because this is an analogy being made in the Bloomberg opinion article. But Thomas Black's argument is that quantum computing may potentially be approaching an important stage in that developmental process. But speaking of the overall development, there's one thing that needs to be discussed regarding quantum computing, because they still have a major hurdle to overcome, and that's referring to the error problem. And as Thomas Black explains in the article, classic computers operate using digital bits. However, quantum computing uses what is called quantum bits, otherwise known as qubits. You hear the words qubits a lot more than quantum bits, but they mean the same thing. And quantum bits, qubits, are extremely delicate, and according to the Bloomberg article, vibrations, heat, and even cosmic rays can interfere with quantum states and introduce errors. And that's one reason you have to be careful when comparing quantum computers based solely on enormous physical qubit numbers. Now, the number that I'm particularly interested in from this article is the number of logical qubits. And logical qubits, what this does, and all logical qubits also have another word, by the way. So if you hear either of these words, error-corrected qubit or logical qubit, they both mean the same thing. But logical qubits use error correction techniques involving physical qubits to create more reliable quantum information. And according to Thomas Black's article, around 100 error-corrected qubits could represent an important threshold where quantum computers begin becoming practical for certain problems that are extremely difficult for classical computers. Now, again, what I do want to point out is the wording that I'm using in this video, because I'm using the word could, and I'm intentionally using that word because I'm not telling you that 100 logical qubits is some magical number where suddenly every quantum computer becomes commercially useful. And I want to make it clear that I'm definitely not telling you that the 100 logical qubits means today's encryption can suddenly be broken. Those are completely different claims. What I'm telling you is that Thomas Black's Bloomberg opinion article identifies approximately 100 logical qubits as an important potential threshold for practical quantum computing. And then he provides several examples of companies working toward that general range. If we scroll down here, you're going to see a few of them, because you're going to see here one example discussed in the Bloomberg article is none other than Quantinuum. And speaking of Quantinuum, it talks about how they plan to release its sole computer in 2027 with 100 logical qubits. And the article also describes what you see right next to it with the Helios machine. And currently right now, what it has available is at 48 corrected qubits. And again, do me a favor and notice the language that I'm using again, because Quantinuum plans to reach that target. It's not guaranteed to happen, and I'm not saying that. Technological developments can encounter delays, engineering challenges, or maybe even challenges regarding the strategy, but the roadmap, it's still worth watching. And another company that he uses as an example is International Business Machines Corporation, otherwise known as IBM. And last month, it achieved 70 logical qubits in an experiment with the University of Chicago. And again, that's another example that is stated here. The next one that I want to talk about is regarding Inflection. And Inflection expects its latest design to provide more than 50 logical qubits next year as it scales towards that 100 logical qubits milestone, that metric, that number right there. And the key word, again, expects, could, potential, all of that, because nothing is a guarantee. It's just a roadmap and expectations of what these companies want to do. So again, those are the keywords right there: expect, could, potential. because there's no guarantees that they will scale to 100 logical qubits like these companies want to. No guarantees. Bloomberg also quotes Inflection CTO and co-founder Pranav Gokhale, and according to the article, Gokhale, again, the CTO, Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Inflection, he said that during its earnings conference call earlier this month, he says, reaching 100 logical qubits is the point at which you start to be able to solve important problems in material science and chemistry. Quick reminder before we continue, if you're enjoying the content and want to connect with the community, check out the first link below for the free InvestQ community. And if you want access to advanced stock research and tools, the second link is a Prophecy 7-day trial for just $7. And last, if you want daily market updates and behind the scenes content, follow me on Instagram using the third link in the description. Now, let's get back to the video. Earlier this month, he says, reaching 100 logical qubits is the point at which you start to be able to solve important problems in material science and chemistry. And yeah, that's the quote right there. And something else that makes this industry particularly difficult to predict is that there isn't one universally accepted way to build a quantum computer. And the Bloomberg article discusses several different approaches. It mentions designs from companies including IBM, Google, and Rigetti. And it also discusses approaches using atoms and photons. And according to the article, INFQ uses neutral atoms, Quantinuum works with charged atoms or ions, and PsiQuantum uses photons. And each approach has the potential, has potentially some advantages and disadvantages involving things like scalability and error rates. And Thomas Black does acknowledge that it's currently too early to know which approach ultimately wins, and that could potentially be multiple successful architectures. So again, there's a lot of uncertainty here, and there's no guarantees. And I don't want anybody watching this video thinking I'm presenting the future of quantum computing as settled science with a guaranteed timeline and outcome, because that's not what I'm doing. And another development mentioned in the article involves government support, because according to Bloomberg, as you do know, and I even made a video talking about this, according to the article, the U.S. Commerce Department in May, it selected a variety of quantum computers designs when it chose 9 companies for $2 billion of funding, including IBM, Rigetti, Quantinuum, Inflection, and PsiQuantum. So again, I'm citing what Bloomberg's reporting here, and as you can see, government funding doesn't guarantee that any particular technology succeeds. And it doesn't guarantee that one of these companies is, which of these companies is going to become the winner, if any of these would be winners. And it does not establish exactly when commercially useful quantum computing will arrive. And what it does show in the article, because I'm talking a lot about what it is it doesn't show, but what we can tell from the article is that substantial resources are being directed toward developing these technologies. So with this article from none other than Thomas Black, tying this all back into the ticker symbol that we're talking about today, SEALSQ, the point where I want to be particularly careful about is separating what the article says from my interpretation, because Thomas Black does not mention SEALSQ in this article at all, not one bit. Bloomberg does not say that LAES will benefit from these developments, and Bloomberg is not endorsing SEALSQ stock. The connection that I'm making is based on the market SEALSQ itself says it's targeting, because SEALSQ has publicly positioned its technology around areas including post-quantum cybersecurity and quantum-resistant cryptography. When I discuss specific SEALSQ products or some partnerships, maybe their revenue figures or company targets on this channel, which we have talked about previously, I always do my best to try to show you exactly where the information comes from, and whether that's a company announcement, the company website, an SEC filing, or another publicly available source. And then what I try to do is separate that from my opinion. And my interpretation here is that the continued progress toward more capable quantum computers could potentially increase the importance of post-quantum cybersecurity. That's the connection. It is a potential industry connection, not a guaranteed financial outcome for SEALSQ. And This distinction is extremely important because let's say quantum computing advances dramatically over the next several years. That still does not automatically mean that SEALSQ succeeds, and a market can grow while an individual company fails to capture that opportunity. Because SEALSQ, they do have competitors, technologies can change, industry standards evolve, and customers, they do have choices. And SEALSQ, it still has to demonstrate that its technology works as intended and that customers actually want it. Because what they also have to demonstrate too is if it can secure commercial adoption and if it can ultimately turn that adoption into meaningful revenue. So I don't want anyone walking away from this video thinking Bloomberg says quantum computing is coming, therefore SEALSQ is guaranteed to win. Not the case. There's another distinction that I want to make, and that distinction is regarding the number of that these companies are trying to target regarding logical qubits being 100 logical qubits as a potential threshold for useful quantum computing on certain problems. And that is not the same thing as saying a 100 logical qubit machine would suddenly be capable of breaking all of today's encryption. Those are completely different technological thresholds. So I'm not claiming we're 1 year away from today's cybersecurity becoming obsolete, and I'm not claiming there's a specific countdown where encryption suddenly stops working. The connection to post-quantum cybersecurity is broader, and as quantum computing capabilities continue developing, organizations have a reason to evaluate how their cryptographic infrastructure needs to evolve over the longer term. And this is where I personally think that the SEALSQ thesis becomes interesting, because organizations don't necessarily wait until a cybersecurity threat is fully developed before preparing for it. And migrating cryptographic infrastructure across governments, corporations, connected devices, and other systems can potentially take years. And there's also a cybersecurity concept commonly referred to as harvest now, decrypt later, where encrypted information could theoretically be collected today with the intention of attempting to decrypt it in the future once more capable technologies exist. And again, it doesn't mean somebody is guaranteed to successfully do this. It explains why organizations may have an incentive to transition toward post-quantum security before a cryptographically relevant quantum computer actually exists. And that's one reason why I continue watching the broader development of quantum computing when evaluating SEALSQ. And again, toward the end of the article, Black makes what I think is probably his most important argument. And is basically saying, he says, one sign of progress is that conversation around quantum computing is shifting away from simply asking whether the technology will ever have value, and instead more of the discussion is centered around error correction, logical qubits, and scaling these machines. Right here, a true sign of progress. Here, I'll highlight that portion of it for you. Right there. Specifically, it says a true sign of progress is that conversation around quantum computing has shifted to error correction and logical qubits instead of whether the technology will ever be of actual value, So again, that's Thomas Black's opinion. It's not my guarantee, and it's not Bloomberg guaranteeing that this is going to happen in 2027. So here's where I ultimately land on all of this. I don't view this Bloomberg article as news about SEALSQ because it isn't. I view it as another potentially important data point surrounding the technological environment SEALSQ says it's preparing for. We have Quantinuum targeting 100 logical qubits. We have IBM reporting progress with logical qubits and error correction. And we have Inflection discussing its own roadmap towards 100 logical qubits. And we have billions of dollars, specifically $2 billion per the announcement that came out in May regarding the United States Commerce Department. There's also increasing conversation surrounding what happens as these machines become more capable. And all of those individual claims have sources behind them, and whenever possible, I'm showing the sources directly on screen. So yeah, that's all I got for not for SEALSQ, but for the article today, and a little bit trying to tie into how SEALSQ could potentially benefit or not benefit, or just overall my takeaways on this. So what do you guys think about quantum as a whole? And what do you guys think about SEALSQ? And what do you think about the article that we saw here on the Bloomberg website? Just let me know in the comment section below. Let me know what you want to see in future upcoming videos, and please let me know what you want to see in please let me know if you do enjoy the content to hit the like and subscribe button, as I do appreciate the support from you guys. But with that being said, stay safe, and I'll see you on the next video.